Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. We are just waiting for another 2-3 minutes for more attendees to join, and then we will begin the program. Good morning, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, based on where you're joining from. Thank you very much for joining right on time. We will be starting the discussion off in just a few minutes. Before that, I just want to make an announcement about interpretation. Interpretation is available. You can click on the globe at the bottom of your screen and select either Spanish, French, or Hindi. You can also write to a colleague at AJWS if you're having any problems, and I will just put their email ID in the chat as well. So just wanted to make that announcement for anybody who wants to pick an interpretation language.
दोस्तों, आज की चर्चा हिंदी में भी आप सुन सकते हैं। इसके लिए आप अपनी स्क्रीन के निचले बाईं तरफ जो ग्लोब का निशान है, वहाँ पर हिंदी इंटरप्रिटेशन सेलेक्ट कीजिए और हिंदी में बातचीत सुन सकते हैं।
L'interprétation est disponible en français aussi, donc si vous avez besoin de services d'interprétation, il faut faire clic sur le globe en bas de l'écran et sélectionner le français si vous désirez d'écouter la conférence en français. Merci.
Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches, depende de dónde están ubicados. Queremos anunciar que hay función de interpretación al español disponible. Cuando activen la función va a aparecer un globo abajo de las pantallas donde pueden activar su canal de interpretación al español. También vamos a tenerlo en los idiomas de francés y hindi. Gracias.
The interpretation function is now available for everybody. So in case you want to pick the interpretation language, you can click on the globe that should now be visible on your screen, and you can choose the language you want to hear the webinar, end the webinar in. Great. I hope everybody has picked the interpretation language. Also, we will definitely be taking in questions from all the attendees as well, apart from the initial conversation that we start off with our panelists today. So if you have any questions during the course of the discussions, feel free to put them in the chat. And we will then make sure that those questions get addressed in the whole program. Fantastic. So just to introduce myself, my name is Manak, and I lead a youth development organization called the YP Foundation. The YP Foundation builds young people's feminist and rights-based leadership on issues of gender justice, sexuality rights, health equity, and social inclusion. This webinar has been organized by the Child, Early and Forced Marriage and Unions and Sexuality Working Group. This working group is made up of organizations that are working for and with adolescent girls and young women at national and global levels to advance their rights, including their sexual health and rights. We develop resources and engage in advocacy to draw attention to the unaddressed issue of how control of adolescent sexuality acts as a key driver of child marriage. We push for funding and policy support for gender transformative interventions that center the agency and autonomy of girls and young women in all their diversity, and challenge patriarchal norms and structures that violate the sexual and reproductive health and rights of young people. So on behalf of the working group, I welcome everybody again to this webinar. Just to start off today's discussions and to talk a little bit about my own entry into this conversation. At the YP Foundation, we implement and advocate for comprehensive sexuality education as a critical strategy to build agency, leadership, and sexual and reproductive self-determination with adolescent girls and young women. This is the experience with which I enter the conversation as moderator, but also making my bias in this discussion very, very clear at the outset. There is a growing body of evidence that recognizes the relevance and the impact of comprehensive sexuality education. And yet there is a resistance to taking up comprehensive sexuality affirming approaches in the work with young women and girls. The reasons for this are both social and political. And these reasons are what we want to highlight and get into in the discussions today. We want to highlight issues and realities that are deliberately ignored in high-level conversations on girls' empowerment, in stopping early child and forced marriages, and in access to sexual and reproductive health and rights for young people. Today's discussion also focuses on understanding the nexus of oppressions that takes away agency from young people, particularly young women and girls, when it comes to decisions around their education, their relationships, and their health. We also want to make a case for a comprehensive sexuality affirming approach to programming by sharing the impact that this approach creates on ground. And as we share about implementing, advocating for, and resourcing this approach, the working group hopes to build coalitions and collaborations between advocates, multilateral agencies, implementing organizations, donors, and of course with young people to advance these lessons and this work. I'm really excited about the range of panelists who have made time to join us in this discussion today. We are joined by a group of experts who bring their experience and insights from having done this work across sectors for many years. And so I'd like to start off by just inviting the panelists to introduce themselves very quickly. I will just name you and invite you, and thank you for joining again, all of you. Starting with Elizabeth, please, if you could introduce yourself.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Elizabeth Okumu. I come from an organization called Trust for Indigenous Culture and Health based in Kenya. And what we do is we link positive culture and health through our various programs, that is healthy households, reproductive health and rights. We have a hotline called Antigen Hotline. We do creativity, so we have therapeutic art in a program known as Art with Heart, and we have the Medicine World program, and all our programs is to try and link positive culture and health. And I'm so happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for joining us. Rosalba, if you could also introduce yourself.
Hola, soy Rosalba Karina Crisóstomo de la República Dominicana, directora ejecutiva de la Comunidad de Lesbianas Inclusivas Dominicanas, Colesdón. En Colesdón trabajamos con colectivos de personas asignadas femeninas al nacer, de diversas orientaciones sexuales, identidades de género y características sexuales diversas. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Rosalba, and great to have you. Nargiza, inviting you to introduce yourself to everybody who's attending.
Okay, thank you. Hello, my name is Nargiza Nurlan Kaze. I'm from Kyrgyzstan and I work for National Federation of Female Communities of Kyrgyzstan. So our organization works on the principle equal, teach equal, where girls support girls and teach each other. I'm a director of girls' health program. This program includes all the topics connected with girls' health, such as menstruation, hygiene, early child, and first marriage. And our organization raises awareness among school girls on issues such as child marriage, bride kidnapping, gender-based violence. So today I would like to share my experience that I have working on the project connected with sexual health and rights. And it's a great pleasure for me to be here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nargiza, for joining us in the discussion today. Eunice, inviting you to introduce yourself to everybody.
Thank you so much. My name is Eunice. I'm Mexican based in Canada. I am the Executive Director of the Youth Coalition for Sexual and Reproductive Rights. And the Youth Coalition is a youth-led organization of young people between 18 and 29 years old who advocate for youth-centered policies and meaningful youth engagement. The Youth Coalition was born 22 years ago, around 22 years ago, to ensure that the voices of young people, especially young people from the Global South, are represented in high-level decision-making spaces. I am very happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Eunice, for joining us today. And Tamara, inviting you to introduce yourself as well.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. It's so good to be with you. I'm Tamara Crane, and I'm the Director of Reproductive Health, Rights, and Justice at the David and Lucille Packard Foundation. We are based in Los Altos, California, and also have offices in New Delhi and Addis Ababa and New Orleans, Louisiana. And we support comprehensive sexuality education with a gendered lens, and I'm going to talk more about that. We also support contraceptives and abortion and care very much about quality services and putting the woman, the person, at the center of care. I'm really looking forward to this panel. Thanks.
Thank you so much for joining today, Tamara. And just reiterating for everybody that the panel will be taking questions from the audience. Feel free to put your questions in the chat in any language that is comfortable of the interpretation languages as well. And we will make sure that the questions get addressed after the initial discussion that we have with our panelists. Just to go right into the discussion then without wasting any more time. We've already laid out the agenda that we have for the discussion today. And to begin with, I think to address ECFM, it is really important to understand the multiple factors that create this issue and how they intersect with early and forced marriage. Just as an example, in the Indian context, and perhaps for South Asia more broadly, the intersection of caste and sexuality is a big driver of early marriage. women's sexuality is controlled to ensure caste purity, and any exercise of autonomy in violation of these codes is punished with often brutal violence. This has been talked about in anti-caste activism. It has been talked about in activism around sexuality rights and prevention of gender-based violence and violence against women. And it is often an intersection of these kinds of oppressions that becomes a driver of ECFM across communities. So I want to start off by inviting the implementers who we have on the panel of, to share how gender-based marginalizations intersect with other complex issues in the communities where they work. So starting with Liz, if you could start with you on just talking to us a little bit about how this plays out in the communities where you work. Elizabeth, if you could start us off with that discussion.
Thank you very much. So I'll start off by talking about the law from where I come from. In Kenya, the law in Kenya is against child marriage, that is married to a minor below 18 years of age. And this means that consent can only be given when you're 18 years and above. That means that when we talk about the law, then the law covers all the minors against sexual offenses and also violations like early child marriage. But we have learned through Tika's work with adolescent and young people that there are so many other factors that lead to child marriage, and it's not just the availability of the law that protects the children, but also what happens within our societies, that is the cultural practices and personal beliefs when it comes to provision and access to services. We realize that there are communities' values and Christian religious values that make it very difficult to access reproductive health information and services. And that is making sexual reproductive health information and abstinence only information, hence making it very rigid and very difficult for adolescents to access information. So this means that the adolescent will be practicing things without actually having the right knowledge to make the right choices based on the information that they have. So when we look at the community and religious values and the sexual debut in Kenya, which right now is at 11 years old, we see that adolescents and young people are experiencing without knowledge, but also without access to services. On the link to child marriage, while the various communities, there are various communities in Kenya, but with different cultural beliefs and values, there are some very similar societal norms that predicts what happens when a girl gets pregnant, and that is most of the time the communities will arrange marriage for these girls without again providing information. And this has also made the girls and the adolescents believe that when you have gotten pregnant at this age, you are very lucky to get married off or to be accepted as a wife by the spouse or by the person that made you pregnant. We also sometimes in the program see even the girls boasting about this, saying, telling part of the introduction being that I'm already married to the person who impregnated me. And this actually will make the others who are not in good terms with the people who impregnated them, which in this case are perpetrators, feel bad that they are not accepted by the same perpetrators. So this brings in another social norm that is not really figured out in the law, but still affects girls in the community and still leads to early child marriage.
Thank you. Thank you so much for laying that out, Elizabeth, in terms of looking at cultural practices and how they intersect, religious values being a big part of it, as well as lack of information or access to SRH services, including abortion services, becoming a reason for early marriage. At this point, Nargiza, I'd like to bring you in to add to this conversation. How do these intersections between different factors play out in driving early marriage in communities where you work?
Okay, thank you very much. So unfortunately, educating girls about sexual health is also one of the biggest challenges here in my country. And at the moment, we are working on the project Girls to Girls about sexual health and risks. And our team, NFFCK, have visited all 7 regions of Kyrgyz Republic. And during the implementation of this project, our team was finally convinced that many teachers and parents, they cannot openly communicate with girls on this topic. But based on the law of Kyrgyz Republic, on the reproductive rights of citizens and guarantees of the implementation, the Ministry of Education, together with the Ministry of Health in 2013, they implemented the program, and according to that program, teachers they should conduct lessons and activities on sexual reproductive health and rights at schools. But during the monitoring of our organization, it turned out that they had never carried out this kind of activities. And what is interesting, some teachers, they have never heard even about that program, which means that here they are depriving the girls on the right to get knowledge about sexual and reproductive health and rights. And here, another problem is increasingly strengthening fundamentalism, Islamic radicalism, and patriarchal, increasingly strengthening taboo on receiving teenagers sexual education. And many like religious people believe that at the same time, they support child first and early marriage. For example, there was one story which really worries me now. During my visit to the south part of my country, here the director of one school, he explained me that for example, if because of religion, many girls, they cannot actually graduate school and they get married when they have menstruation, because people who live there, they believe that girls should marry when they have menstruation because it means that they are already not a child. But if we discuss about religious conservatism here in Kyrgyzstan, we have more than 90 nationalities and many ethnic groups, and having sex like before marriage, it is for some people it's normal, but at the same time for many people, especially for Kyrgyz people, it's a big guilt. And there was even some stories when, for example, fathers or like brothers, they just refused to live with their daughter or sister because of her some behavior. So considerably the majority of Kyrgyz population being believers, and they condemn, like they consider the girl humiliated, the honor of the family. So as I mentioned previously, and then here what I also would like to highlight that as in many other countries, like giving sexual education to girls, it is a big problem. But here, I don't want to say that only religion or lifestyle or maybe culture of my country, it is a main source of early marriage. And it's a really difficult question where you and me and like all the participants of this conference, we should gather our experience and work out one program and think over how to stop this bad practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nargiza. I know that Rosalba, you also work specifically at the intersection of sexuality and early and child marriage. So I would like to definitely invite you to talk to us about how that plays out in the communities where you work. And just also, I think many colleagues are joining in different languages. So just reminding the panelists, ourselves, and telling everybody else it might look a little bit staged, but we are deliberately going to talk a little slow to make sure that the colleagues joining in any different languages are able to catch up and hear the conversations comprehensively. Rosalba, please go on.
Sí, aquí en la República Dominicana, el país se encuentra entre los niveles más altos en América Latina y el Caribe, con cifras por encima del 35.9% del matrimonio infantil en mujeres, específicamente niñas jóvenes, entre los 20 y los 24 años de edad. A todo esto, el Poder Ejecutivo promulgó la Ley 1-21 en este año para prohibir el matrimonio infantil y las uniones tempranas. y así garantizar los derechos fundamentales de las mujeres, adolescentes y niñas. No obstante a esto, esta ley no tiene un reglamento de cumplimiento y viene a derogar algunos artículos de la ley 659 de nuestro país. Cabe destacar que esta ley no incluye lo que son las personas de la comunidad LGBTIQ asignadas femeninas al nacer dentro de sus procesos normativos. Y el tema del matrimonio infantil y las uniones tempranas forzadas en la República Dominicana es un tema muy heteronormativo en el país. No fue hasta el 2020 que la comunidad de lesbianas inclusivas dominicanas, Colesdon, decidimos realizar una investigación denominada Yo soy todas esas niñas que sacaron de su casa, para ir rompiendo con el imaginario heteronormativo en la República Dominicana y se puedan leer esas otras voces e historias de niñas, adolescentes que han sido expulsadas de sus hogares por no cumplir con roles tradicionales de género heteronormativos que la sociedad dominicana nos impone. El país, República Dominicana, es un país que aún está bajo el régimen del concordato en nuestra Constitución. Esto quiere decir que fue una alianza que se hizo con el Vaticano y la República Dominicana en la dictadura de Rafael Leónidas Trujillo. Y esto hace que los procesos de incidencia política en contexto dirigido hacia la comunidad LGBTIQ se nos dificulte por todo el tema de los grupos religiosos y antiderechos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that, Rosalba. And I think it's very important to note both the specific marginalization or oppression done through existing frameworks against people who are gender or sexually non-conforming, but also the violence done by automatic erasure, where curricula on sexuality education or existing policies of access to SRHR or laws don't address that intersection at all, and therefore ends up creating a lot of violence just by that erasure. Thank you for highlighting that for us. And I think before we go, this diversity of underlying issues that inhibit girls' agency requires a comprehensive approach. And before we delve into issues around advocacy and policy engagement, I do want to go back to Liz and Nargiza to ask about the impact. While we all push for a shift from age to agency in early and child marriage programming, what does this comprehensive approach using comprehensive sexuality education or addressing these issues more holistically achieve on ground? What kind of comprehensive impact do we see becoming possible with this approach? So Liz, if you could share a bit more about what all shifts you see on ground, apart from just the delay in the age of marriage through CSE programming.
Thank you very much. Tika, being a huge advocate of comprehensive sexuality education, of course, we have seen girls making, both girls and boys actually making informed sexual choices. And this is when you say delayed sexual debut. But apart from that, we have also seen through our programs other very great changes in the community. And one of them is recognition and control of power dynamics, that the young people are very cognizant of the power play that is happening and how they can use this power play to, they can use their different powers that they have to be able to create healthy communities, and how they can also control some of the powers that are directed to them and not necessarily be of harm to them. So this makes our societies safer and healthier. We also learned that girls have gotten the aspect of bodily autonomy and how it is important for them to make choices around their bodies, rather than letting other people who are around them make choices for them and for their bodies. We've also seen girls making initiatives to fight for against community injustices. And I'll just give one example of 15 to 17-year-old girls who actually went to get one of their own, who was a classmate who had been married off, and brought her back to school, even without letting the community leaders know. So we are seeing that girls are taking more initiative and are becoming agents of community change. We also see, especially respect in different dynamics, respecting, and this is the value that, one of the values that we teach at TICA is respect, that we are same, but we are also very different. So we see that most of the time before, the girls would, and the adolescent would only stick to the values that they accept and that they believe in, and will see other people who are behaving or who are different in their own perspectives as people who are wayward. But after the programs, we see that they respect diversity, they respect differences, and they actually acknowledge and are able to accept everybody in the society with their different values and their different beings and their different choices. Lastly, we also see a lot of leadership and responsible behavior through their lives. And I always say that they become better lovers, they become better parents, they become very responsible citizens. And this actually has a very positive effect in the communities and the country at large. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for starting us off on that, Elizabeth. I think the value of what you're saying, recognizing power dynamics, and then in that process, also ensuring that collectivization gives them more power and being able to exercise it, is a really beautiful example of how comprehensively this approach can actually build agency and leadership over a period of time, and not just focus on a delayed age. Nargiza, opening up the same question to you. In your work, what is the kind of impact beyond just delaying age that becomes possible by using comprehensive sexuality education as an approach?
Okay, thank you. Involving girls to the projects or to the activities, it doesn't mean like only teaching to girls, for example, in which age they should get married, or how to prevent child marriage, like early pregnancy and so on. Here, I would like to highlight that it's really important to engage, to involve girls, because by working from an early ages, it gives a lot of experiences, it gives a really good education and information for girls, and it creates really good opportunities to the girls to their future. For example, girls by working on the projects, they can improve and develop themselves in all spheres. And here I would like to highlight that, for example, in our organization, we have this kind of experience when girls they start from volunteering, and after some time they become coordinators of projects, and even some girls, they could organize their own organizations, or they could implement their own projects. And this kind of changes are becoming because of activities that they started from early ages. And girls in our organization reached nowadays really great results, participated in many international conferences, organized many events for girls in national level, or for example in their regions. And some girls, as I mentioned before, starting from volunteering, they become leaders of many programs or many other organizations. And the success of one girl can affect and change the life of many girls, because we know that all girls, mostly young people, they always learn something from their friends, and they always have this kind of jealous And that's why here I would like to highlight that we should always pay attention to the girls if we want to reach really good results here on these topics that we are working on. So, and here I would like to highlight that it's really important to pay attention to girls and to girls' organizations.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think specifically highlighting the need to involve girls in all aspects of the programming and also invest in organizations that are working with girls over a period of time is a really important aspect of building this power and part of the overall ecosystem of comprehensively addressing these issues more sustainably. So thank you for bringing that out. I want to turn now to Rosalba again. Since a lot of your work has been through research on prevailing issues and the need for comprehensive sexuality education, could you share a little bit about the opposition that young people face and the kind of advocacy that is required then on ground to make sure that comprehensive sexuality education programming is implemented and can be sustained?
Aquí en la República Dominicana, Colestón realizó la investigación Yo soy todas esas niñas que votaron de su casa. En esta investigación se arrojó muchas informaciones importantes que nosotros como organización dirigidas por juventudes LGBTIQ, de personas asignadas femeninas al nacer, quisimos destapar esta caja de Pandora. ¿Por qué expreso esta caja de Pandora? Porque muchas veces se entiende que el matrimonio infantil y las uniones tempranas son exclusivamente de las niñas, niños y adolescentes dentro del ámbito heteronormativo. Sin embargo, en la investigación que nosotros realizamos se pudieron observar que el 63.03% de las personas que pudieron participar en la investigación, que en total fueron 28 personas en grupos focales y 53 personas en encuestas a profundidad, que salieron de sus hogares siendo adolescentes. Esto quiere decir que el trabajo a realizar con los cuidadores y cuidadoras de estas niñas, niños y adolescentes que transgreden esos roles tradicionales de género, y también con estas niñas, niños y adolescentes, debe ser de manera integral, y el Estado debe de asumir responsabilidades jurídicas y educativas para que esto no siga pasando, porque estas niñas, niños y adolescentes sufren mucha violencia, y todo su sistema de desarrollo social, económico y emocional es maltratado cuando sus cuidadores los rechazan por no cumplir con esos roles de género que la sociedad nos impone. Los roles de género son específicamente los que a nivel social se le ha asignado a un hombre o a una mujer. Y al nosotros transgredir y romper esos roles de género, somos tratados distintos y distintas en la sociedad. Entonces se debe de trabajar específicamente con procesos de educación desde el Estado, ya que el Estado Dominicano, la República Dominicana, no posee una currícula sobre educación sexual en las escuelas de manera heteronormativa. Imaginémonos que tampoco posee una currícula en donde pueda educar a la niñez y a los adolescentes sobre los roles tradicionales de género y cómo estos deben de ser respetados en las escuelas. Se ve en muchos casos en nuestra organización en donde adolescentes y jóvenes de la comunidad LGBTIQ son expulsados de las escuelas por no cumplir con roles tradicionales de género. Cuando son expulsados de las escuelas, después comienza otro proceso emocional. En las casas también, y deben de también, desde sus cuidadores, protegerles estos, y desde el Estado también. Gracias.
Thank you, Rosalba, for highlighting that specifically to look at. I think we often forget that the root cause around gender roles and normative gender practices that are pushed and oppressively on many young people also lead to decisions like taking away agency or early marriage or forced marriage in many communities. So thank you for bringing that up. Over here, Eunice, I would like to bring you in to broaden this conversation on advocacy that Rosalba just started. And I know that there is also already a question in about the resistance that comprehensive sexuality education might face from governments. So I'd like to ask you, Eunice, how do we most effectively represent these realities and ensure that there is a supportive environment for CSE? And what are the advocacy priorities we should all have and that the Youth Coalition works with that can support the advancement of this work most effectively?
Thank you so much. So from the Youth Coalition perspective, I think that what I can say is that when we talk about youth-centered policies, such as comprehensive sexuality education, we want to see something more than initiatives targeting young people. Youth-centered policies mean that the experiences of young people are in the center of the strategy, and for that we need youth participation, meaningful youth participation. Not only inviting young people to events, but working with them to making sure that their advocacy priorities are in place. The Youth Coalition has been working on CSE for some time now, and we recognize the importance of advocating to ensure that the states adopt CSE as mandatory in the school curriculum, but we also understand the limitations of it. And we also have the opposition that is very strong. I have been talking with different people, with different young people in different contexts, from Mexico to the Netherlands, from the Philippines to Ghana, and all young people tell the same story. There are so many challenges to implement CSE in school because decision makers don't understand what CSE is. Every state adopts what they understand by CSE, and this is not okay. And then there is the independence and the autonomy of some schools and school boards and the freedom of education in our countries, right? So teachers and parents don't believe in comprehensive sexuality education. It is impossible to teach something that you don't believe in. And just as Rosalba just mentioned, this is real. Like, we have educators, we have parents that do not believe in all the aspects of comprehensive sexuality education. The majority of young people are not taught how to seek health services. So if they get to the healthcare system, the stigma and the discrimination that young people face is brutal. So even though they are receiving comprehensive sexuality education, there is no framework for them to actually exercise the rights that come with that education. Among the membership of the Youth Coalition, we have young healthcare providers, we have doctors, and we have people who are at the frontline services. And they provide services such as access to abortion, sex services, etc. And they have reported how hard it is for clinics to create youth-friendly services. And the current comprehensive sexuality education is based on fear and abstinence, just as my colleagues have mentioned in this amazing panel. And young people want to learn more about chemsex and harm reduction and safe abortion and toxic relationships and the link between gender-based violence and CSE. Many young people right now are experiencing with polyamorous relationships, and that is not taught, and gender identity. Our generations are really challenging what colonization and Catholicism brought to our communities, and I think that that is very important to recognize. There is a huge need to build safe spaces online as well. I'm Mexican, and we Mexicans, we love memes, right? And I am in different Facebook groups, like Latino Facebook groups and websites where women share memes. And it's really hard to see how 90% of the times is not memes, it's several questions around rape without naming it rape, questions on how to get gynecological services, questions about gender-based violence, because many young women don't even recognize what gender-based violence is. It is so hard to see all of these women sharing painful experiences without support, other than the network of other women and the support of other women who also lack the tools to deal with these experiences. Comprehensive sexuality education must include education on discriminatory practices and harmful practices, not only to avoid child marriage and female genital mutilation. We must include abortion care, we must include information on forced sterilization, forced contraception, because many racialized women and poor and women living in poverty face these practices and they don't even know. I've been talking to different young women who have, I don't know, like had abortions in the past, and they are sterilized after that without their consent, without even asking them. And this is very important because this is gender-based violence as well. Many girls and women with disabilities also experience these harmful practices, and this is something that we never talked about, because what we are aiming almost always when we talk about CSE is about controlling the reproduction of young people, and that's not it. We must ensure that people know their rights and how to access justice when these rights have been violated. Many women do not even know that they are victims of discrimination or violence. And just as a parenthesis, I think that young people are not involved because older folks believe that we need so much preparation to know how to engage in spaces, and that is not really true. We are really experts, and young people are incredibly creative to come up with solutions, and we have so much expertise, and we need to be recognized as experts in these subjects. I had the pleasure of speaking with different networks of adolescents on bodily autonomy and SRHR, and their agenda is so strong. I swear that the adolescent networks are better organized than the vaccination processes all around the world. I swear. And these generations are amazing. And our generations are all about mental health, and everyone is going to therapy. And we acknowledge when we don't have the emotional tools to deal with life. And that is part of constructing healthy relationships and avoiding gender-based violence in relationships. And that's something that must be included in comprehensive sexuality education. I was also talking to different advocates, and one of the most neglected areas of SRHR is the capacity strengthening of healthcare providers. And this is needed to ensure the link between CSE and health services, as I just mentioned. With this in mind, I would like to say that the advocacy priorities of young people are slightly different than the priorities of older folks. While many people push for in-school CSE programming, we push for youth-led initiatives and campaigns and youth-led delivery services. Why? Because we understand the limitations of the law, we understand the limitations of institutions, we understand the limitations of our states and our context. We just had a live like 1 or 2 weeks ago where YC members from Honduras, Venezuela, Nepal, India, Canada, and Kenya were discussing how young advocates are dealing with the opposition. And it is needed, and 100% of young people that we have talked to, they agree that funding youth-led initiatives is the best way to go. Why? Because the evidence shows that young people do not look for information in school or in the healthcare system. It is important to provide it, yes, but young people do not access information these ways. They look for information online with peers, with friends on a website like ours. Hence, the importance of funding community-based and youth-led initiatives. We are also information providers. The misconception that comprehensive sexuality education is only for young people. No, like we want to see older people being educated as well. Young people have no issues with using different pronouns to accept diversity. Young people have shown a lot of interest in learning how to deconstruct relationships. And the misconception that CSE should target youth is one of the examples on how these policies are not youth-centered. Because if they were youth-centered, initiatives would be targeting also other folks, parents, teachers, healthcare providers, policymakers, even SRHR organizations. We must listen to young people, the barriers that they face, the discrimination that they report in the healthcare system. There are so many violent conducts towards young people in the healthcare system that have been denounced, and we have a lot of information about that if someone is interested. And this is why CSE policies must be addressing these barriers. It's not enough to target the youth, it is needed to work with youth. Then also, young people need accessible information on how to participate and engage in CSE policy making. We need to be able to know how to engage in these decision-making spaces with states, with UN agencies. These bodies need to build safe spaces for young people to be engaged. We need to be seen as experts and not as participants. We need to ensure that CSE strategies recognize the importance of cultural diversity. In general, young people from the Global South express that there is a need to decolonize SRHR services and the education. And talking with indigenous young people, for example, there is a huge need to respect their traditional ancestral knowledge, the figure of midwives and other people within their communities who are in charge of CSE delivery. We need to fund those services. We need to provide resources for communities to implement CSE. We need to fund networks of young indigenous people who are working to advance gender equality within their communities. And funding them and funding us is such as important as changing the law, because we are the ones changing social norms and bringing awareness to our communities. There is a need for youth-led accountability frameworks to hold our governments accountable and schools accountable for the quality of CSE provided. This is non-existent, and no one wants to fund these initiatives because this is the priority of young people and not the priority of older folks. And there have been some of the items that we have been pushing for as co-leaders of the Generation Equality Forum. Well, the Youth Coalition was elected as one of the co-leaders of the Generation Equality Forum Action Coalition on Bodily Autonomy and SRHR. And this is exactly some of the issues that we are raising. Everyone is in line with addressing CSE as a key component of gender equality, but as young leaders, we are here to remind people how to do that by putting the experiences of young people in the center. Of course, there have been many challenges in the process, and we have been super vocal about those challenges on how spaces are not youth friendly and how there is a lot of need of capacity strengthening for older folks to know how to engage with youth, not for youth to know how to engage in these processes. And if anyone is interested, like the youth leaders in the Action Coalitions and in the Generation Equality Forum, we launched like a Young Feminist Manifesto that addresses all the principles that we want to see when we are engaged in these initiatives. And just to close my intervention, I was asked like some days ago, I don't even remember why, but like I participated in some sort of event, and I was asked, how does the opposition look like for young people? And it is so diverse. Like for us, for young advocates working on CSE, the opposition is the parents and the healthcare providers and judges and decision making and the pro-family movement, but also when the allies are not allies, right? They become an opposition. And by allies, we mean when SRHR organizations, feminist organizations working on projects targeting young people without meaningful youth engagement, without this participation, without this co-leadership, without this co-ownership, without the co-designing of strategies and providing and sharing resources with other people, then they become also the opposition. And this is why it is so important to ensure that youth-led initiatives are funded. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nise, for that really comprehensive and really hard-hitting. I think everybody was listening and sitting up when you were talking to pull together all of these diverse but really important strains of listening to young people, because the curricula and what we are pushing to teach as part of sexuality education needs to catch up to the realities of young people. And you really illustrated that very well by talking about how the need is to address things like polyamory, chemsex, and we are still stuck at menstruation and menstrual health not being allowed into the curricula. So that kind of catching up needs to be done, for emphasizing the need for funding and putting resources through meaningful youth participation. So involving young people and recognizing them as experts, I think that's definitely a really significant part of it. And because you were talking, I'll take that cue around funding and bring in Tamara at this point, because I know that the Packard Foundation is not just aware of this landscape of advocacy and implementation, but is also a firm supporter of it. And as a foundation, the Packard Foundation stands out in supporting both organizations as well as actually investing directly in building capacities of youth leaders and youth advocates to become and to ensure that their expertise reaches these different levels. We often say that funders should learn from implementing partners, but Packard leads the way in that you are a collaborative and invested funder. So Tamara, could you tell us and speak to us about some of those best practices in supportive funding from your vantage point that helped the sector?
Yes, happy to. Good to see so many friends on this call. And thank you for the rich conversation we've been having. So just to say that we like to think we fund a continuum of reproductive health rights and justice, and that at the foundation of that is comprehensive sexuality education. We believe in a gendered lens. We believe in addressing violence, and also looking at resilience and a trauma-informed or mental health lens. And the research we funded shows that comprehensive sexuality education done in that way has an impact both on health outcomes, but also on some of the social indicators we care about, like ending child marriage, like reducing violence, et cetera, like keeping young people in school. So we are very thoughtful about this. We are a family foundation, so we go a bit with what the family cares about, and they have long cared about sexuality education. And we tend to fund everything from actual implementation of model programs with some evaluation, and then we fund policy and advocacy, we fund research, and we really aim to get high quality programs into and infused into government systems. We think a lot about young people being in school, being out of school, being online, and also being offline. And we think it's really important to tune into young people's context and to listen to them as we help create programs. I think somebody said something very important about not controlling young people. And I think the adults in young people's lives and the policymakers often want to do that. So we very much want to stress both bodily autonomy in the work we support, and also have a sex positive lens. So this is a bit extreme for some people, for some funders, for some governments, and yet we think it's important to start out by taking risks and also providing evidence, and then pulling people along with us. And we believe in this both because we think these are fundamental rights for young people and for people in general. And we also think that there's an enlightened self-interest to it, so that as people come to us and say, well, how do you keep girls in school? How do you end child marriage? How do you impact all of these social issues? We say, let's start at the beginning. Let's start with comprehensive sexuality education. Let's start early. Let's stay for a long time. Let's have many, many conversations. And increasingly, some of our partners are also talking to parents, and we find this very successful and to have an impact. We also have been thinking a lot more about how you change social norms. Not an easy thing. I know some of you are thinking with us about this, and how you really shift culture. And we think you almost have to do it person by person, community by community, stay local, look at both the grassroots, but also then look at who the influencers are in culture more broadly. We think, though, if you start comprehensive sexuality education at a young age, that this can make a difference. So how do we do our funding? We tend to fund in communities, we tend to fund locally, and we like to spend a lot of time listening and understanding what's happening where we work. We've worked places for a long time. For example, we've worked in India, particularly in Bihar, for over 20 years. Also in Ethiopia for over 20 years, and in the United States. And so we get to know people, communities, our partners deeply and watch their work. We think it's very important that as much as we can, we give general support. We give multi-year support. We know things aren't always going to work out. We really hope our partners take risks and try something new. And that's okay if somebody comes to us and says this isn't working. It's been a particularly hard year with COVID. People have been remarkably creative, I think. And also we've had to be flexible, and I think that's very important. It's been important to me to say, I want most of all for our grantees to stay well and to get paid. And if they have to take time away to be with family, to care for their friends and loved ones, that's the most important thing they can do right now. And so we've had to make lots of shifts, and I know everybody on this call has had to. It's been flexibility and assume good intentions all the way. We also think that as we fund, it's probably most important of all to listen. And so we try to listen to young people everywhere we go, whether it's in a global conference or whether it is in a community. And that has really helped inform the shifts in our funding and the evolution of our funding. So I thought I would end with a story because somebody said, can sexuality education impact child marriage? And perhaps because Manak is leading us, I thought about sitting in Bihar in a village with a group of young people, of couples who had gone through a program around sexuality education and life skills. And at the end, a young woman named Pooj, who was 17, raised her hand and she told me her story. She said that when she was 14, her grandmother said, okay, it's time to plan your wedding. And she said that before that, she'd been very excited and she thought she would plan her wedding. But after going through this program and her world became a bit bigger, she decided that wasn't what she wanted. She wanted to finish her school. And so she said to her grandmother, no, I'm not going to do that. And they argued. And then finally she said, okay, I'll do it under one condition. And that's that I can vote. And her grandmother said, but of course you can't vote. You're not old enough. And she said, that's right. And the law says I'm not old enough to get married. And she not only shifted the course of her life, the story spread amongst 400 villages, and she shifted the course of many young women's lives. So very powerful stories can make a huge difference and also I think inspire all of us. I am happy to take questions and of course looking forward to your stories and to being in touch. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tamara, and especially for bringing in directly a conversation from the grassroots where this work is happening. I think really value a lot of your interventions. One, to acknowledge the current situation that we are in, to provide flexible frameworks. I know many colleagues in India have benefited by those. And I think it's also demonstrated to us back that having this kind of a comprehensive resilience building approach actually helps us even in getting communities to address this crisis differently and better. So I think bringing that conversation into this comprehensive approach dialogue as well. I know that many questions are open. Like I said at the start, we will definitely be taking in questions from all those who are attending. So once again, thank you to all the panelists for this initial round of conversation. I know that some of us have more to add and to respond to questions. For addressing all of those questions, I would like to invite and introduce Sarah, a colleague from AJWS, to anchor the audience question section of today's conversation. So over to you, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Manak. Thanks to all the amazing speakers. Thanks, Manak, for your great moderation. And thank you to the almost 300 people who are joining this discussion online from all over the world today. It's so great to have you here. I want to thank you for the great questions that you have been putting into the Q&A box over the course of the session. I'm going to do my best now to read out as many of those as possible to the panelists and give them a chance to answer. I also want to acknowledge that many folks have been asking for different resources. And so while we won't discuss that right now in the Q&A session, we will consider that in a follow-up email to all of you about how the panelists can share their resources back with you after the session today. So thanks for bringing that up. I'm gonna ask, when I ask a question, I'm gonna put it to a specific panelist and ask them to come in. If after that person answers, panelists, there is something that you would like to add, feel free to unmute yourself and build on your fellow panelists' answer. So I'm going to put the first question to Liz from TICA. And some of the participants have asked about the role of boys and men, both in child marriage prevention work and also, connected to CSE. And I wondered, from TICA's perspective,
how you work with men and boys, how you see them participating in spaces like this alongside girls. How is it done practically, and sort of what is your approach? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have both boys clubs and girls clubs. And how we work with boys is that we create, as I have mentioned before, is that TICA is very high on values. It's a value-based organization. So we work with boys to create a platform where girls recognize the powers that they have and the ability for them to use those powers to make choices that they want to make around their sexual reproductive health and rights, but also boys to recognize that girls have those spaces and can make those choices and can actually go forward and be able to access the choices that we make and that they make. And I will give an example, because sometimes we think that culturally the patriarchal systems make it very difficult for girls to access their choices when it comes to sexual reproductive health and rights. And one of them is the Maasai community, where we still have a lot of cultural systems still intact and in place, and girls still find that they don't have the voices. But then when we use other conversations, and that is intergenerational dialogue between the young people and the old people, we actually realize that in the Maasai community, there was a group of women called Olamal that would converge and make sure that the rights of the women were observed even within that kind of community. So this helps us navigate the cultural belief that boys have the say and girls will have to follow what boys says, but also boys actually realizing that girls can make those decisions and girls can actually access those decisions. So it's more of creating that equity within the community where both recognizes the power that each of them have and respects that in all its forms when it comes to rights.
That's great, Liz. Thank you so much. If no one else is going to jump in, I would like to put the next question to Nargiza. Nargiza, there's been some questions about what kind of resistance program implementers face when they're implementing CSE, whether that resistance comes from the government and policies that your organization thinks should be passed around CSE, and also what kind of resistance you experience in the communities among religious leaders, families, and parents in implementing comprehensive sexuality education.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So here, can I just add some comments for the first question? Yes.
Of course.
Yeah, so according to our experience, for example, it's a really interesting and difficult question about involving men and boys. For example, we also faced with this kind of problems when, for example, we girls, when we started to organize any kind of workshop, and there were like a group of men who always try to stop our like activities. And there, for example, we just started to look for some parents, and then after some like period of time, we could find some parents, especially fathers, who can really support us. And then, for example, now we have our partnership organization, which is called like Father Support Daughters, which means like here we have a special group of men who always follow us, for example, when we have any kind of activity in one region. And then only these fathers or brothers, for example, by their works and by their like explaining activities can involve men, because men or boys, they will never join any kind of this kind of organizations until they don't see some men in that organization. And here I just want to say, so maybe you also need some group of people or like special, I don't know, like men who will actually work with men. And then for the second question, here, for example, we had faced with many challenges during the implementing of our project. And if you And here, for example, we don't have any support from our government. And then here, which I just want to highlight that, for example, during our activities, we always do complex work. As I mentioned before, for example, we work on the principle equal to equal, which means that, for example, girls teach girls, and here parents teach parents. We have, for example, group of parents who support our organization. We have group of teachers who support. We have group of doctors. And then, for example, when we start to implement any activity, we just involve all our parents, all our teachers, and then we do this kind of complex activity, because it is impossible to work only with girls. And then when we work only with girls without including involving parents or teachers, there we will just raise the violence to girls, because after our activities, parents will judge and they will say what kind of activity it was, because sexual education, as I mentioned, it is taboo. And when we say we are going to teach about sexual education, they always imagine that we are going to teach something bad. And then that's why, for example, in our activities, we always, firstly, we start to work with parents. We just explain why do they need, why especially it is important. Then we start to work with teachers to explain them, and just to came to sustainability. And then after, finally, we go to girls. So we do this kind of complex activities, and it's always help us to somehow, join and work easily with girls.
Nargisa, thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. We appreciate it. My next couple of questions are going to go to Rosalba. Rosalba, there's a few in here specifically for you, complimenting your work, and curious to understand, based on your work in advocacy with government, how have they received your recommendations and advocacy around supporting LGBTQI young people and their sexual health and rights? And do you have any recommendations for others that you would like to share along these lines about what has been successful?
Muchas gracias. La incidencia política en la República Dominicana, en donde las juventudes y los jóvenes LGBTIQ seamos quienes dirijamos y llevemos a cabo estos procesos, se torna muy difícil en el país, pero no imposible. Nosotros como organización forma parte de nuestra historia que cuando comenzamos el proceso de legalización en el 2017, el Estado Dominicano nos rechazó la incorporación legal, en donde expresaba que uno de los artículos objetivos de los estatutos organizacionales, que no podíamos como organización dirigir acciones de incidencia política que abogue por los derechos de la comunidad LGBTIQ, joven, adolescentes y de niñas. ¿Qué pasa? En esa situación, nosotros duramos 2 años en un proceso de incidencia con el Estado directamente, específicamente con el Ministerio Público. En ese momento no teníamos recursos económicos, pero sí teníamos recursos humanos de personas aliadas que nos apoyaron y nos dieron asistencia legal. En el 2020, ya después de 2 años, pudimos desarrollar y tener nuestro registro de incorporación legal. A todo esto no manejábamos recursos económicos. No fue gracias a Girl First Fund, una agencia que fue nuestra primera agencia que nos apoyó, confió en nosotros y fue la agencia que nos apoyó en la financiación de la investigación. Entonces, con relación a los procesos de incidencia dirigidos por juventudes, lo que les puedo decir es que para la incidencia se necesitan cuerpos jóvenes, se necesitan también que esos cuerpos tengan una representación digna en los procesos de incidencia, y esa dignidad humana se la da que pueda estar bien alimentada o alimentado, que pueda tener conocimientos para hacer su proceso de incidencia y capacitaciones, y que esa participación sea realmente efectiva. También se puede coalicionar y trabajar en procesos con otras juventudes, que las organizaciones dirigidas por jóvenes puedan manejar sus propios recursos, que existan más agencias y más cooperacionantes que puedan apoyar económicamente con relación a los procesos que hacemos. También de manera en capacitaciones, ejemplo, Girl First Fund, que es la agencia que nos financió primeramente, nos apoyó económicamente, pero constantemente nos da un acompañamiento de apoyo con relación a aumentar nuestras capacidades a nivel interno de la organización, a cómo fortalecer la parte financiera y todos esos procesos de desarrollo también desde otras agencias que nos apoyan. Podemos desarrollar acciones de incidencia, porque para desarrollar acciones de incidencia desde las juventudes, no solamente se necesita el cuerpo y la voluntad, sino que también necesitamos los recursos económicos y también recursos de información y capacitación para poder ejercer esa incidencia política dignamente.
Thank you so much, Rosalba. That was great. We have time for just a couple of more questions. So I'm kind of grouping them by theme and merging them in some cases. But there's some really interesting questions coming up about, the issue that I'm going to ask actually Eunice and maybe Tamara to comment on this. I know there's a lot of focus on child marriage prevention and preventing girls, what we can do to stop girls from marrying before age of 18. But then there's also the issue of girls' agency and young people's agency, and the times in which, and the trends in which we see young people choosing to marry before age 18. And I know maybe this can be a tricky topic. I would love to get both of your perspectives on how you see this, sort of the role of law in drawing the line in the sand at age 18, and how we, balance that with respecting young people's rights and choice. Eunice, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Well, I would like to start my response by acknowledging how diverse you are in all the world and how different the contexts are. For example, and how early unions and child marriage have their origins in different social problems that might not be resolved only with CSE. For example, there is this amazing network of young women in Mexico, Morras Help Morras, and they ensure that young women can access safe abortions in context where abortion is still criminalized in Mexico. And they were telling me how they started working with women living in poverty in really poor and very hard neighborhoods. And what they found when they started bringing all of this information to young women, and they started doing their labor of reaching out to young women and hey, we're here if you need to access abortion, we're here for you. And what they found is that especially women, especially the youngest women, women from between 12 years to 14 years old who are pregnant, those are sometimes the girls who do not want to access abortion. And there are two main reasons that they found, especially in this context. As we know, Mexico has a huge issue on the war against drugs and everything that is around organized crime, etc. And some of the things that they were saying is that on one hand, there are girls who that decide to get married or to form their own families at the very early stages and to give birth as an act of emancipation. Why? Because they come from contexts that are super hard, where there are young girls from 12 to 14 years old with 5 or 6 siblings whose parents have 2 or 3 jobs to be able to provide for them. And in this context for them, when they come from school, they have to take care of 5 or 6 siblings, and for them it's completely rational to form their own families so that they can emancipate from those circles. And so instead of taking care of 5 or 6 children, they only have to take care of their own children and maybe like their husbands or partners or whatever. So this talks about like a reality that young women need more than CSE. They need equality, they need equal opportunities, they need like poverty is something that needs to be addressed in order for to end this type of conducts and harmful practices. And on the other hand, there is also this notion, for example, when we talk about abortion in this type of context, like how society is targeting young women who are giving birth, adolescent moms, and how the feminist movement is always targeting them with the abortion discourse. And many of them have expressed that they want to give birth as an act of resistance before this white feminism that says that poor women shouldn't be having kids. So this talks about like the reality that these women face and like how complex the realities are and how they need more than CSE, they need services, they need equal opportunities. We need to tackle poverty and inequality in order for them to be able to make decisions, right? Bodily autonomy is more than only like making decisions about like how and when to have children. You have to have the conditions to be able to make those decisions. So of course, comprehensive sexuality education is very important to tackle the misinformation and to tackle like toxic relationships and all the challenges that go around that aspect. But we also need to tackle inequality. So I think that it depends on the context. And for example, many young women that we have talked to who are living in these hard conditions, they are not interested in receiving SRHR information. That they are more concerned about like the context of militarization in our countries and how in the neighborhoods the police come and take their husbands and their partners and their brothers and their fathers, and they take them away because they were smoking a joint of marijuana in the corner, and then they incarcerate them, and then they spend like 10 years in prison because of these type of things. So that's what is more challenging for these communities. This is something that won't be resolved only with education. This is something that has to have other strategies as well.
Thank you so much, Eunice, for that comprehensive answer. And Tamara, I know we're short on time, so just briefly, I know the audience was curious to get your angle as a funder on this issue.
So I'll really answer quickly and say we're having an interesting side conversation on the chat also about having comprehensive sexuality education without sort of a surrounding shift in norms, and educating the adults can be in vain. And I think that is an important point. I think most of all, what we need to underline, our line in the sand, is making sure that young people have opportunities, that they are empowered, that they have economic opportunities and education, and as opposed to being completely focused on that 18-year-old law. Even though the laws are a beginning, they're really not the middle or the end. So you've got to look at society more comprehensively. I think that's very important. And be creative and listen to where young people are.
Thank you so much, Tamara. And thanks to the audience again for so many questions. We're not going to get to all of them because we only have a couple of minutes left for closing remarks, but we'll definitely take them into account. We'll put together a brief write-up of this session with the key messages, and we can consider how to answer your questions in that. And so before I turn it back to Manak, I just want to say on behalf of American Jewish World Service and the Child Marriage and Sexuality Working Group, which is convening this session today, thank you so much for all your great energy and thoughtfulness and curiosity about this topic. And we look forward to seeing you again in another online event soon. Thank you. And so Manak, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah, for anchoring that whole section, and for everybody for such in-depth engagement with this issue and with everybody on the panel. So just to close, I'll go back to our panelists to invite them for a quick 30-second closing remark, something which is an insight or a message that would help us advocate better with governments, with donors, with all all gatekeepers at all levels to make sure that this work can be advanced as much as possible and as comprehensively as possible. So starting maybe with Nargiza, would you have a quick ending message to share? Nargiza, inviting you to just.
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today and to meet all of you. And then today I tried to share my little experience that we have with our federation. And then, as everyone knows, for example, sex education for children, especially for girls, it is really important for all of us, and we should start it from an early age. Despite any problems. And the practice of our organization on sexuality education and upbringing among girls show the correctness, girls among girls by the girls themselves on the principle girls teach girls. And then here I would like to highlight and say that it's really important for girls organizations to have additional support from donors. We all understand and know that girls are not really well educated and they don't have really great experiences. But anyway, if we will create any potential, and if we will give them any opportunity to show themselves, then any projects during the projects or during any kind of activities, we will see really good results, and we will see that it is really effective. And then here I just want to say that maybe when donors are going to, for example, when they are organizing any kind of context, or when they are, for example, going to support any kind of organizations, maybe they will give special places. For example, among 10 organizations, 3 of them or 2 of them will be special for girls organizations. And then because we have a lot of really great organizations, we have really experienced dedications, but because of that, girls organizations or girls, they are always standing behind that organizations, which means that they cannot take any kind of support. We always say that the young generation, they are our future, but we don't need to forget that young generation, our girls and boys, they are living here and now, which means that we should start to make contribution here and now to have a really good future for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nargiza. So investing in young girls, advancing their leadership and girls organizations, and also recognizing young people as leaders here and now today. Thank you so much for that. Rosalba, I would like to invite you next with a quick message as we close. Rosalba, if you could share with us a quick closing message, inviting you to address everybody next.
Sí, muchas gracias a JWS por la invitación y por haber coordinado esta estupenda reunión, este panel, que ha sido muy provechoso. Yo quisiera puntualizar específicamente en que a la hora de los procesos de incidencia política, muchas veces nos encasillamos en estar en el lobby, en el cabildeo, y dejamos atrás el cara a cara, el estar de cuerpo a cuerpo con las personas en las comunidades, en el barrio, en los sectores más rurales de los diferentes provincias de los países. También quisiera puntualizar la importancia de que se escuchen las voces de las juventudes, no solamente que esas voces se escuchen a través de organizaciones dirigidas por adultos. Sí es bueno el trabajo intergeneracional, pero nosotros también, las juventudes LGBTQI diversas y las juventudes del mundo, también necesitamos tener nuestros espacios en donde sean representados por nosotros, y también que nosotros podamos, nosotras, tomar esas decisiones y que se puedan escuchar nuestras problemáticas desde nuestras propias voces y encontrar solución a las mismas. Algunas veces solo nos enfocamos en hablar de los problemas, pero a la hora de poder dialogar con algún financiador no podemos externarles cómo se puedan solucionar esas problemáticas. Entonces es muy bueno que todos esos procesos se trabajen desde las comunidades con las juventudes LGBTIQ, que se pueda también invertir en investigación. Ejemplo, esta investigación que nosotros tenemos desde Colestón es una investigación pionera, una investigación que no se había pensado y se pensó desde la organización, porque en la organización habemos personas, juventudes y adolescentes que habíamos sufrido esta situación. Entonces, que se invierta en investigaciones que sigan aflorando todas esas diversidades de situaciones que pasamos. Hasta aquí. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Rosalba. Just underlining that of investing in research and also generating insights as we take up programming and implementation. So keeping that up front and center. Tamara, inviting you to share a closing message next.
I'll give you this funder's perspective, which is to think very much about context and all things are local, to pay attention to evidence and ever-changing evidence and be willing to keep asking questions and listening and understanding how things shift. And then to look at your own values, what matters to you, and fund accordingly. And at the bottom of all of this, or at the very top, is to listen to young people and make sure that their voices are present in funding and in programming and in policy making. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Tamara, for that brief but really important message to underscore the importance of context and the importance of listening to young people along with all the other things that you mentioned. Unise, inviting you to address everybody next with a closing message as we end the discussions today.
Thank you so much. I think that my only closing message would be fund youth-led initiatives. And if you're working on the SRHR field, in the feminist field, engage young people in the design of your programs targeting young people and make them the leaders of this initiative, because there is so much power in young people. And thank you so much to our funders as well. I think that I didn't have the chance to thank Tamara, but the Packard Foundation is doing an amazing job funding youth-led initiatives. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for that closing message, Nise. Elizabeth, we started with you to end with you now to bring it full circle as the closing message.
Thank you very much. So to close, I'll echo what Tamara has been saying all along, and that is listening. And I would say when it comes to advocacy, especially comprehensive sexuality education, listening is very important, and not just listening to the policymakers, but listening to the people in the communities at the grassroots, listening to what the data is saying, listening to what the environment is communicating to us. And I always say that when we listen with the intention to understand and not to respond. When we listen with the intention to respond, we'll respond very quick, and most of the time the impact is really low. But when we listen with the intention to understand, we don't know when to respond, but when we respond in a very impactful way. And that is to our donors, that when you listen to respond, when you listen to understand, it will take a longer time, and they should be very patient when funding advocacy activities, because they tend to take a longer period of time to get the desired impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That's really a lesson for life, and so relevant when I think of it in the context of CSE programming and programming on ECFM more broadly as well. So thank you again to all the panelists for making time, for being part of this discussion and enriching it with your experience and your insights. Thank you so much to colleagues at AJWS for leading the organization of it and for all the background work in the run-up to this discussion today. And from the working group, from the Sexuality and ECFM working group, thank you again to all the attendees for joining in and for making the discussion so much more comprehensive and rich with all of your engagement and intervention. So thank you for that. We hope to keep on bringing more such discussions and keep raising these questions and issues with everybody together in future. And we will keep everybody informed about any such initiatives or conversations that are planned. Thank you so much again for joining in.